Years ago, the banks drew a red line around the South Bronx because immigrants and Black and Latino families lived here. The money stopped, the people got poor, and the landlords burned them out of their homes for the insurance money. But to a 10-year-old girl who spent 3 years with her mom and baby brother in a Brooklyn homeless shelter, our first real home inside that Bronx red line was beautiful. Boogie Down, the birthplace of hip-hop, all that magic and all these people got redlined in. We were an island of salsa music, block parties, y la revolución. From the young lords to the people who rebuilt their blocks, brick by brick, building by building. Our people stayed to fight. Survival, resilience, creativity. That's what the South Bronx is. But we've been sold out by the political establishment and the greedy developers who fund them. And our own community leaders are complicit, taking their money and helping them steal our homes. Housing is a universal human right, but because of racist housing practices like redlining, America needs a homes guarantee. But that's not enough. We need Medicare for all and a Green New Deal. I've spent my life fighting for this community. Working people, single parents, the elderly, the poor, people who ride the bus and work 2 jobs. They're the most powerful people I know. I'd be the only member of Congress to have grown up homeless in New York City. I remember that 10-year-old girl, humiliated that she lives in a shelter, who promised herself that she'd do anything to keep other families from feeling that shame, who found her first home in the South Bronx and became the daughter of a revolution. I'm Samelys Lopez, and I'm running for Congress because the South Bronx saved my life, and there's nothing I won't do to save my home.
Welcome once again to The Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vrettos. I'm a sociologist who's taught at John Jay College and Yeshiva University here in New York. Welcome again to our show. Do the poor and disenfranchised gain more by participating in conventional electoral politics, or by engaging in mass defiance and disruption, or by a combination of the two? The consensus view is that they obtain justice mainly when they work with other groups in a majority alliance within the system. However, when we look at American society from the bottom up, we see that reforms often fail or have not been used in ways that primarily benefit the poor. The opposing view, if you will, the dissensus view, argues that progressive legislative victories and gains for the poor come about mainly because of the possibilities opened up by confrontational politics and nonviolent protest among the underdogs themselves and their allies. Moral confrontation, disruptive actions such as rent strikes, wildcat or non-authorized strikes, sit-ins, teach-ins, boycotts, all manner of nonviolent creative actions are ways of resisting and transforming the system. The poor gain more through the use of these strategies and tactics. During this moment of profound national and international trauma and catastrophe, the debate takes on life and death importance. Groups and movements in the United States and around the world are rising and attempting to shake the world and the nations they live in to their very roots. And this doesn't happen very often. When it does, we only have a brief time to act and learn about what is possible as everyday ordinary people struggle to survive, transform their lives, their institutions, and their world. Today, we have some incredible guests, 2 incredible guests on the Radical Imagination who are just doing that. Samelys Lopez is a Bronx native, running for New York's 15th Congressional District in the South Bronx. Her remarkable story includes a period of her childhood when she was homeless and lived in the city's family shelter system. Despite going to underfunded Bronx schools in University Heights, she graduated from Columbia University's Barnard College and received a master's degree in urban planning from New York University. She's rooted and embraces, as does our other guest, the politics of transformative justice that unapologetically is centered on working class communities, grassroots organizing, and the most marginalized and voiceless in the community. And our other guest is Stephen Null, who is a longtime activist in the Small Business Congress and the force behind the legislative attempts to enact the Small Business Survival Act. So, survival. Um, Welcome both of you to the Radical Imagination. I'm so glad we could make it today,
Thank
and
you.
it's an honor, it's a blessing to have you both here. Samelys, let's start with you. And I showed that in our introduction. Prior to the introduction, I showed your 2-minute clip on. Is it called redlining or aligning? How's it? What's it called again? Redlining, right? Redline.
Yeah, our campaign video that you can find at lopezforthepeople.com. It's called Red Lines.
Okay, so redline, and I think that's a relevant term to get us started talking about your own campaign, housing, small businesses, and the struggle to survive. So, what is that video about? What does that tell us about yourself and what you're about?
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me here, James. It's a pleasure to be sitting alongside Steve Null as well, who's a leader in our small business community in terms of advocacy. So thank you so much for giving our campaign this platform. So the video is basically about me, right? My story, growing up in the homeless shelter system, our family, like what we struggled with, and how the experiences that we struggled with as a family are actually not unique to us. There are many people in the 15th Congressional District that are suffering through those things. There are still people living on the streets, dealing with homelessness, dealing with food scarcity, especially right now in the time of the coronavirus. So the campaign video is also about the South Bronx. So the campaign video has two subjects. One, it's, talking a little bit about my campaign, a little bit about my life story. And then the second subject, which is near and dear to my heart, is the South Bronx and the incredible beauty of this community and the resiliency and the creative movements and the cultural movements that have come out of the South Bronx, like hip hop, like salsa, and basically that the people that stood here for generations have made this community what it is today, and it saved the community from the time where the landlords were burning the buildings for insurance money. So the campaign video, in a humble way, is basically highlighting that history and giving respect to the movement elder leaders of the past and the community that has stayed here for generations to make the Bronx what it is today, and how there were residents here that basically like reclaim the Bronx. And I was on a bike ride the other day because part of our campaign we do community building activities. So every Sunday we're going to be doing different bike neighborhood rides throughout the Bronx. And we passed by this famous street. It's called Charlotte Street. I don't know if you've heard of it,
Yep,
but
sure.
that's a famous street in the South Bronx that Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan visited in the 70s and the 80s back in the day. And around that time, it was just rubble. It seemed like a war had passed the community. And then, when we biked through that street on Sunday, it was just a different sight. It was a lot of houses, it was a lot of greenery, and a lot of vibrancy. And that's a testament to the people here, the residents during that time that fought for the Bronx. So our campaign is trying to honor that legacy. And that's why we are fighting for a homes guarantee platform, which is saying that housing should be a universal human right in America, and that we need to decommodify the production of housing. And we need to target speculative land practices that artificially increase the cost of rent. And tied to that is rejecting the influence of big money in politics. Because when you take real estate developer donations, corporate PAC donations, that basically compromises you as someone who's running for office and is a public servant, right? Like at the governmental level. If you're running for office, you shouldn't be taking those contributions, especially if you want to fight for housing justice, because doing so is
antithetical, and it's disrespectful to the housing justice movement space. So you can't have your cake and eat it too. It needs to be like, you don't take real estate contributions, because that's basically like taking the housing justice movement back many steps. So that's basically like, what our campaign about. It's the most important issue in our platform, and it's informed by all the doors that we knocked, all the phone banking that we've done for the past few months since the coronavirus epidemic hit. And it's something that if I were to get elected, it would be, the first thing that I would fight for. And I want to give a shout out to Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, who introduced the Homes for All Act into Congress, which is basically elevating the Homes Guarantee platform in Congress. And she's pushing it so that it can actually become a law. So if I were to get elected, I would knock on her door, the first day, and I would co-sponsor that bill with her. So we need housing as a universal human right in America and in places like the South Bronx.
And this is not just academic, intellectual talk here. You've built houses and homes, right?
Right. So my experiences living in the shelter system with my family and facing that kind of instability inspired me to pursue social justice and community organizing as one of the main solutions that our communities have to upend the system and to organize for the kind of housing that we want to see in our communities. And it also inspired me to pursue the affordable housing development field as a way of building housing for people coming out of vulnerable situations, people coming out of the shelter system, young people aging out of foster care. So for the past decade of my life, I've actually have helped to build housing, affordable housing here in the Bronx and in New York City. So I've organized for housing justice, and I've also played a role in building housing as well. And from acquiring sites to figuring out the financing for the development. So I have technical expertise in helping to build housing, and I've also organized for it alongside the Housing Justice for All Coalition as well, who was instrumental in fighting for and bringing to New York State one of the most progressive pro-tenant rent reform laws that New York State has seen in a generation. And that was accomplished because of organizing, because the housing activists downstate and upstate formed an alliance, and they pushed the elected officials to do the right thing. So I'm really honored to be a part of that coalition.
And we are going to have, unfortunately, say a waiver. The last moment had to cancel her appearance for the show because they're passing, well, we won't use the term, a very negative bill that she had to address her attention to. But she'll be on with you in mid-June. We'll have a fuller talk on that.
Yeah, and I want to give a shout out to Sia, because I consider her to be like a sister in the housing justice movement. And,
right.
She's been instrumental in the Housing Justice for All Coalition. In terms of like shepherding it and like bringing it, to the next level. So Sia is an amazing powerhouse. I encourage you to look at her work with the Housing Justice for All Coalition and amplify it in any way that you can.
Absolutely. We will. So survival mode. Steve, you're helping to enact the Small Business Survival Act. So we need for people to have homes and lives and meaning in life and so on. They need to be able to have jobs and have businesses and so on. Tell us a little how your work in activism ties into what Samelys has been talking about.
Well, our organization, the Small Business Congress, is calling on the City Council for an emergency vote on the Small Business Job Survival Act. And we're calling on an emergency vote because of the crisis and the situation that the majority of small businesses in New York City are. And I'm going to back up just a little bit. In your opening statement about people protesting and people demonstrating and being involved. And there's one group that is totally not been involved in any kind of political action, and that's the small business owners. And one of the reasons is that they've been led to believe that there are people representing them, being a voice for their interest. And like the business improvement districts, chambers of commerce, the small business committee of the city council, the small business service center of the government, of the administration. And the problem is all of these organizations are controlled by the real estate lobby, who are causing the problems. And they're actually blocking, instead of promoting the rights of the small business owners, they've blocked any kind of legislation that would interfere with the speculation and landlords making profit. Now, why that's important now is that all of these businesses, the majority of the immigrant-owned businesses, were facing a crisis before the virus crisis. And they were put on month-to-month leases. They were going out of business, as any neighborhood could see. They were having the shortest length of leases, rent gouging, extortion, everything that you could possibly happen to them. Our government, instead of protecting them and giving them rights, was actually blocking any kind of help to these people. Now, here's the problem. The current virus is speeding up. It's going to dramatically speed up those businesses that were just barely hanging on, or who felt there was no future. I mean, if you had a month-to-month lease, what's the point of going back into business? If you only had a year lease, if you weren't making any profit because you were paying your landlord's property taxes. And so we feel that unless they vote to pass this bill, which gives 10-year leases to all the businesses and no more property tax, paying the landlord's property tax, that there's at least 40,000 immigrant businesses that are not going to go back. And that's 320,000 jobs. So we're on the verge of an economic catastrophe unless they pass this law, unless they change how they treat the backbone of the economy. And I want to make this crystal clear, because the government, all these people who are blocking and any rights to the small business owners, let's make this very clear, that the majority of small business owners are immigrant families. Okay, 64 to 68% are immigrant families. The number one employer of immigrant families in New York City, of residential New Yorkers, are small businesses. Mm-hmm. And therefore you must save them. And up to now, all of these organizations that were supposed to be representing the backbone of the economy, even the politicians, they were in fact taking money from the real estate and blocking anything. And they've created a crisis on top of a crisis. So our immigrant small businesses have to face two crises. One that existed before that was absolutely destroying them. And now so there is no option. We're heading towards a catastrophe. And that's why we're saying, let's pass this bill. And there's three people running for Congress that the people in the Bronx need to know their role in making the immigrant businesses more vulnerable to closing, their role in denying the Bronx small businesses rights needed to survive and to save jobs. And I would like to name those three. I know that, I know there's many people running, but these are three that stand out for a good reason. The first is former Speaker Melissa Margarito. And when she was a councilwoman, she was terrific. She testified at the hearing, give the rights to the small business owners. She knew about the extortion. She even called for an investigation. And she was proud that the city council was standing up to the real estate. Now, that was when she was a council person. She was a sponsor of the bill. When she became speaker, she withdrew her sponsorship from the bill. She was the only speaker in 30 years that never allowed a hearing, not even a hearing on the bill. And so she's totally responsible for denying the immigrant businesses rights. And now the other one is Richie Torres. Richie Torres is not a sponsor of the bill. He's not a sponsor of any legislation that would protect the small businesses. We've asked him to be, of course, because of the Bronx. And even when the Bronx led the city in evictions with all the real estate speculation going on, he refused to be any part of sponsoring any legislation that would regulate the landlords. And when the Small Business Committee, when they appointed one representative from the Bronx to represent, it was a landlord, Mark Jonai, Councilman Mark Jonai, who used to be in the assembly. He's the most pro real estate person possible. There was absolutely no objection from the Bronx delegation, from Torres, that this man had no business being. The small businesses were in a crisis, and this man, he had no business being chairman representing the Bronx, this landlord who was opposed to any regulation of landlords, and he was opposed to any rights for tenants. And so, but Richie Torres, that's okay with him. And that's not okay with us. And the last person is Michael Blake. Michael Blake has one of the groups who, quote, are supposed to be representing the small businesses are actually property owners. The business improvement districts. He's a big supporter of them, and they support him. And let me tell you, one of the problems with the small businesses in New York City, and especially in poor neighborhoods where all this gentrification was taking place, was that when they set up a business improvement district, by law, the majority of the board members are property owners. The other part of them are banks and politicians. And so they actually testified in October against giving any rights to the small business people. So those are the three people that
Steve, you're saying, we'll get back to some of your points, but I want Samelys there's a lot there to process. So Samelys, comment, and then we'll get back to Steve. How do you react to?
Well, I mean, I think this goes back to what we talked about earlier about rejecting real estate developer money, right? Because it has a corruptive force in our democracy, in our local politics, in our immigrant communities. So I think that for someone like me, who's vying to represent this community with pride and strength and courage, the most important thing that someone like me and people in my position can do is be independent from sources of oppressive funding that keep the communities down. So I was in a debate, a few days ago where I challenged everybody who's running in the race to return all of the donations that they've accepted from charter schools, corporate PACs, and real estate developers, because that is a very dangerous thing for our democracy and our advocacy. So we need to continue the legacy of people like Congressman Serrano, who has a history of not accepting that kind of funding. And that is my commitment to the community. That's how I've been running this campaign. And if I were to win this election, that's how I would continue leading in the community. So the influence of real estate developer money is strong, especially in a city like New York, and especially in this congressional district, because we're experiencing a gentrification and a displacement crisis because our land is so close to Manhattan. So there's a lot of speculation that's already happening in places like Mott Haven, Port Morris, and other areas of the South Bronx. So we need to stand strong as a community. And if you are serious about representing the people and fighting for the people, you have to reject big money in politics. It's just, if it just doesn't work because you're compromised.
How else would you try to protect small businesses?
Mm-hmm. I would look to the guidance of people like Steve Null. And like he's correctly saying, I think that, we need to push for the Small Job Survival Act to become law, because that's something that's going to protect the immigrant community. It's something that's going to, protect small businesses from being displaced. It's something that's going to prevent the gentrification of the small business community, which is the bread and butter and the lifeblood of our community. And that means that we need to take, a break, a solid stance against speculative practices that target, everybody in our community. Because at the end of the day, we got to focus on our social capital. It's the people that make up the South Bronx, that make our communities like what they are. So we need to create a space to, enrich their lives, to make sure that they have sound economic opportunity, and businesses are part of our community. So, if I, were to get in office, I would definitely seek out the guidance and advice of people like Steve Null and others. And Steve Null, I was wondering if you can talk to us a little bit more about the Small Business Job Survival Act and what it means for the community and how we can spread the word. And maybe people like me can use the platform that we have to spread awareness about the Survival Act.
Okay, thank you. First of all, most New Yorkers aren't aware that the business, when their leases expire, that they have absolutely no rights. Unlike residential leases, commercial leases have no rights. And what happened is that the city of New York, beginning with Giuliani, opened the entire city to real estate money from all over the world to come in and speculate. And the Economic Development Corporation was just built to promote this real estate speculation. And that the victims of that were your little small businesses, because when their leases expired, they had no rights. Our bill, it's a rights bill. Frankly, it's all it is a rights bill. Is that when your lease is up, you have the right to renewal. The landlord right now could send you a 30-day notice and say you have 30 days to vacate the premise. I'm going to rent it to somebody else.
Whatever the reason the landlord may have, or no reason.
No, he doesn't have to give any reasons. As a matter of fact, one of the most famous was Zero's in the Bronx. Zero's Bakery, their original shop, 56 years. And they opened the mail and they said, you have 30 days to get out. And the owner said, we'll pay anything. And they said, no. And what happens is people go to the agents or the owners and they give them cash. I want this property. I want that property. And they just take it. So our bill will prevent that. But more importantly, it gives businesses the confidence to hire people, to expand, to make capital improvements, to grow. And that's what creates jobs. And that's what you want. And you can't do that unless you have a long-term lease. If you have a year left, 2 years, 3 years, you can't even get a loan from a bank. You know, they're talking about all these loans. But more importantly, you can't remodel, keeping up with competition. You can't put money into your place to make capital improvements. The lease is key. Absolutely key. They have to have a 10-year lease. And the second factor is they have to have some rights to negotiate. And under our bill, you have equal rights with the landlord. Absolutely. He has no more rights than you have. And if you can't reach an agreement, then you have an arbitration process where an arbitrator has a list of fair things to review and come up with a reasonable rent. But it levels the playing field. It gives the businesses a fighting chance to protect the investment that they made. Everybody in government is concerned about the profits of the real estate, their landlords. That comes up over and over again. Well, how about the landlords? Doesn't he have a right to this? And doesn't he have, the landlords have made so much money in the last 20 years off of this market that's been generated from worldwide speculation. And it's the small business guys that, how many businesses they let me give you an example how bad it is.
Yeah, how many have been lost?
All right, here's this under de Blasio, okay, the spatial court that evicts warrants for eviction, 57,748 warrants to evict small businesses. We estimate at least 170,000 businesses have closed. Every block, not every other block or every 5 blocks, every single block of the city of New York has empty stores. And this has been going on for 10 years. So you can see the crisis because these businesses we've reached a point where they can't pay the insane rents, they can't pay the growing property tax, because one of these things that stimulated during all this speculation is property tax. That's why the government, look, we're benefiting. The property tax is going up. So we have more money to spend, $95,000 budget to spend. But the fact is,
business owners are paying for that.
That's right. We estimate $6 billion a year. Instead of going to salaries and growing, this goes in the pocket. So we've reached a tipping point. Now, this is before the virus. We've reached a tipping point where most businesses almost broke even or lost money. Very few were profitable. Now, what this virus is going to do, the crisis, is going to make a lot of businesses, and you're going to be shocked at the number of businesses that just do not open up. and it's going to be a catastrophe. And it's going to be a catastrophe for everybody. I mean, housing, let me ask you something. What is affordable if you have no job? I mean, the bottom line is that the very foundation for stability for families are jobs. And
Isn't that true? Yeah, a great point. Samelys, isn't that true with housing as well? You're going to see an unbelievable upsurge in evictions. And as you spend a little bit of your childhood in the homeless shelters here, I mean, how many people can be absorbed with that? So we're heading to, as Steve is saying, business and housing catastrophes.
Yeah, no, I think that this is the opportunity that we have as a society, as a community, to fight for the kind of society that we want to live in. Because what we're seeing is that the current system that we have right now is not working for a lot of people in the community that need the assistance. So we need to re-envision, getting behind things like a universal housing guarantee, universal health care. There's a lot of people in the community that don't even have health care, because as we know, healthcare is typically tied to whether you have a job or not. And because of the coronavirus, a lot of people are unemployed and they can't have, access to healthcare. And also with the undocumented community as well, they don't have access to healthcare. And a lot of these benefits that are included in the stimulus packages. And, our immigrant community pays into the system. And, it's just really wrong what's happening. And we need to essentially use this crisis as a catalyst to organize for the kind of changes that we want to see in our communities at the local level. So I really commend Steve Null for his advocacy, over the past few decades in the small business community, and for continuing the fight and educating a new generation of leadership so that we can continue the fight. And
Jim, let me just follow up on this.
Sure.
The reason that I name these three people is because these people are in a position of power, or they were in a position of power, and they go before the community. And everything that they say is great. They're progressive. They're going to do this. They're going to do that. And the truth of the matter is, once they take that real estate money and take their agenda, they empower the people, these people who give them the money. And this is the outcome. All of these empty stores and everything. This is a poster child of why the people need to vote new people in. I mean, just because they've seen somebody and somebody's been in office, and they shouldn't go running for voted for them. What they should be saying is that you people who were in office, you're responsible for not doing anything for all these empty stores and all these jobs lost. And you have to take responsibility. And that's what I'm saying. And that's why I pointed these three people out, because they not only didn't they do something to save to give businesses rights, they actually worked rigging the system for the real estate industry. They worked for the people who were really destroying the backbone of the economy and the jobs. And we just can't keep reelecting these people who are funded by the real estate. Otherwise, it's going to be catastrophe. And that's where we are today.
Yeah, we'll get right back, because let me make one little point, because I was watching that debate you were in, Samelys, and you called out one of your opponents there about this money, and the questionnaire asked him about it, and all he answered was he commended you on your campaign. Do you remember that moment? Yeah. Oh, we've lost your. Wait 1 second. Okay.
Yeah, I do remember that moment. But to be fair, he wasn't the only person that I asked that question to. I asked that question to all of the corporate Democrats that were on the stage.
Right.
Because he's not the only person that's accepting this kind of money. Other people are accepting that kind of money too, or have had histories of taking this money. So I think what we need to do is embrace transformative politics. And the way to get there is by raising money the right way that centers the values and the needs of the community. I'm very proud to say that in our campaign, Over 80% of our contributions are small dollar donations, and our average contribution is $15. Sometimes people donate $10 to our campaign, $1 to our campaign, and we have the highest amount of individual donations outside of anybody who's running in this race. So we're leading in individual grassroots donations. We're leading in donations from the Bronx, and we're leading in donations from the 15th Congressional District itself, because it's really important for us to have local people to have a sense of ownership over their own political process so that they can buy into it and feel like, they connect with the campaign and that they're supporting the campaign, whether they're donating $1, $5, or $20 to the cause. And I think that's what it's going to take to clean up our government over the long term. And I think that the community should support working class candidates that fundraise money in that way, so that we can increase our ranks in all levels of government and fight for transformational change at the political level.
Jim,
I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead. I wanted to ask you about the emergency vote you talked about before.
yeah, but before I say that, I just want to make a comment. These lawmakers who have been empowered by the voters to be their voice, they get they are controlled so much by the machine, not just the money, but once they get the money buys them into the game. But once they get into the game, it's the chairmanships and the machine takes over, and they sort of leave their ethics and their values and the progressive values on the steps of City Hall or whatever government they're going into. And I'll give you a good example of this. The crisis in the Dominican Republic is going to be devastating for the tourist industry everywhere, but especially in the Caribbean for at least 2 years, we'll say. Now, those families down there and the economy depend so much upon the money sent from the small businesses, which the majority are Dominican, supermarkets, drugs, and the jobs. The majority of them are from small businesses. They support families in the Dominican Republic, the very survival of some people. Now, there's not one person in the Bronx that's going to stand up and say, we need to save our small businesses because it impacts families. It's the life and death. This is so serious. The worst crisis that these people have gone through, and there's not a word. Why? Because of the campaign money, because of the public relations firms, by the machine, by the endorsements. They control the message. And the message isn't one of let's save the immigrant families and let's give a damn about the families in the Dominican Republic or in Mexico or any other place. And this is the reason why the people shouldn't be rushing and voting for people because, oh, we know this person, because you don't know this person. And these people are progressive. And I'll tell you, we've asked people before, it's a loaded question, but are you aware that immigrants are the main targets for extortion by unscrupulous landlords for cash? Their life savings, 50, 60,000 cash. If they say yes, then they'll say, what did you do about it? And if they say no, then shame on you because everybody knows. Now, how progressive are you if you turn your back and allow immigrant businesses and families to have their life savings stolen by landlords? And you can see that there's so many frauds running now that we need new people. The bottom line is that we're telling people to take a chance on people that are going to represent you and not special interest or not the machine.
Yeah, so I actually want to, build on that. So, that's true what, Steve is saying. I mean, we need to stand with the people. And I also want to challenge people in the community and in the movement space to redefine what progressivism means. I think that the word progressivism has been co-opted by corporate establishment politicians. And we need to reclaim that as a working class movement. What we need is working class mass politics in America and our communities that's populist in nature, that centers the needs of the working class communities unapologetically, because we need to figure out that and advocate for the fact that it's the workers that create the wealth in this country. And I think that as a society, we've forgotten that. Workers are the ones that basically are subsidizing our way of life, the immigrant community, the small businesses. So we need to, basically reckon with that. And right now in my congressional district that I'm running in, there's a lot of frontline delivery workers, essential workers, undocumented brothers and sisters that are carrying on the work and subsidizing our way of life. So, we need to rectify the imbalance that exists between the 1% and the 99%. We need to take on corporate greed. We need to take on the predatory real estate developer luxury industry from continuing to prey on our communities. And we need to redefine what progressivism means, because it's been co-opted. In a sense, it's been whitewashed. It doesn't really mean anything anymore. So we have to, redefine, give another label to our movement space, because it's not progressivism anymore.
Well, I'll give you a perfect example of redefining progressive. The Progressive Caucus allowed the speaker for 4 years not to have a vote, a hearing, not to even have a hearing on doing anything to stop the closing of a single business. Not one progressive member of the Progressive Caucus stood up. And the reason is that these people are afraid they lack courage, and they're afraid to stand up to both the machine, the speaker, the mayor, and the real estate lobby. And therefore they just stay quiet and they allow injustice. And the small business owners for 10 years have been denied economic justice in our government. And this is the result, that they're now threatened in the worst time ever for immigrants to lose their businesses and jobs right now because of this crisis. So that's why we called for an emergency vote. And basically, the emergency vote tells everybody, which side do you stand on? Are you with the workers? Are you with the small businesses? Are you with the immigrant community? Or are you with the machine and the landlords? And so I don't know what's going to happen, but I'll tell you, the only thing I trust is when somebody votes. I don't trust their rhetoric. I don't these people, everybody gives you the same thing. I don't trust the organizations that these people are part of, the bids, the chambers that they hide behind, the SBS, the small business, all these organizations, they're cover they just are political cover for these guys who are doing nothing to give justice to these people and to the workers.
Steve, I'll give you a chance to say, I just was curious, spell that out. You're calling for a vote. What are you attempting to do?
All right, the Small Business Job Survival Act has 29 sponsors signed on. It takes 26 to pass. The Small Business Committee has 5 members. 4 are sponsors of the bill. 4. They've had a hearing on the bill. It's been changed over and over again. There's no criticism, no legitimate challenge to the bill. It's just a simple, you have rights, and that's it. Now, why don't they go and move this bill and vote? And our thing is that if you were ever going to give rights to these small businesses, if you were ever going to do something to save the small businesses, if you don't do it now, then you've sold your soul to the real estate lobby, and you're never going to do it. And then, to be honest with you, we're looking to 2021 also. We need 26 council members to take back the government, to take back democracy, and then if we have to, we'll pass the bill. Then we can pass the bill easy. The same week that they sign in, the people will pass the bill. But right now, there's no reason. There's every reason to pass this bill now. Every reason in the world, because of the terrible state that our small businesses were in, especially the immigrant community. We're the worst in the nation. Understand something, that in the entire America, the small businesses that are most vulnerable to closing are right here in poor neighborhoods. The worst.
And and we've had conversations in our campaign travels that basically reinforce what Steve Null is saying. A lot of people in the immigrant community that own businesses, they, are really pressured and feel really stressed out about the fact that their leases are not long-term leases. And, that prevents them from fully investing in their businesses over the long term. And they also, don't like the fact that they feel like the property owners pass on their property taxes to the small business owners as well, because it just doesn't help them be sustainable over the long term. So the bill that Steve is doing, or is advocating for, it seems like it's the right way to go. And we need to fight for our businesses to get that relief. And I think that more small businesses in the community should organize and should learn about this bill so that they can advocate their respective city council people to do the right thing.
Yeah, well, listen, that's what we've been trying to do. But you know who stopped us more than anybody else from organizing in the different districts?
I'm not sure.
The council people. Because it would expose them. It would expose them of the money that they've taken, and it would also expose them of doing absolutely nothing for the past 10 years to save a single business. And therefore, they don't want anyone to know their role in this crisis. They don't want anybody to know that their role in serving the landlords. And therefore they hide behind the bids. I don't know if you're aware of it, but every bid, there's 76 bids. Some of these council members are members of 2 bids. And so they go there, they sit down there with banks and with the landlords, and they know what's going on. If you walk down the street, you know what's going on. But what are they going to do about it? Absolutely nothing. Almost all the bids, property owners make donations to these guys, to the people who sit on their boards, to basically go along with us. We'll give you political cover. You can come and cut a ribbon and join with the chamber and show you how much of a great job you're doing, as long as you don't call us out. And it's a disgrace. I mean, frankly, it's an absolutely disgrace. But that's our biggest job. If we had one progressive council member who was not afraid of these guys, they would be out there organizing their stores, their customers. I mean, there are so many people who want to save the small businesses, but they don't know how. And what we're saying is the only way you're going to do it is you're going to elect new people. That's the only way you're going to do it. You want to save your small businesses in this crisis, you want to save the jobs, you better get these people out who have been representing the landlords for the past 10 years. That's the only way you're going to do it. And so that's what
you're doing. Okay. And that's what Samelys is doing. Tell us a little about how you're organizing your campaign in the few minutes we have left here, so that some of these people will be out.
Yeah, so you can definitely reach out to us at lopezforthepeople.com, and we are using our phone banking to reach out to people in the community to find out how they're doing, to see who's hungry, to see who we can deliver groceries to, and just a general wellness check-in, in addition to reminding people about the election. So if you want to sign up for a shift, you can definitely go to lopezforthepeople.com. And, thank you so much for your leadership, Steve, on this issue. I'm going to continue to look to you for guidance so that we can do what's right at the federal level for small businesses. And I also want to give a shout out to Sia, because one of the reasons that she wasn't able to join us today is because she's advocating in Albany for this means tested, rent relief bill that's been passed. That is basically like saying, oh, let's get $100 million in to only help out 8,000 people in New York. And that was passed in the middle of the night. And, people in the housing justice movement are up in arms about it. So we need to fight against that, because as means tested and is not going to get people the relief that they need across the board. So what we need to do is fight for a cancellation of rent across the board. So that's, I wanted to plug that in because I wanted to make people aware of that, that's what's happening right now in the housing justice movement space.
So what's the difference between when you talk about a rent strike, rent cancellation, or just a temporary allowance? What does that mean? What's the differences there when you say you're advocating a rent a moratorium? Is that
Well, what the housing justice movement is advocating for is the cancellation of rent and, you know, an eviction moratorium, right? If you're having any issues like paying your rent. So basically what the New York State legislature has done is that they're trying to put a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. Instead of canceling the rent, they're providing a means tested program that will only help a small amount of people in New York. There's like what, like 9 million renters in New York and small property owners. And using $100 million to only help out 8,000 people is not a good use of money. So I think that what we need to do is cancel rent and institute a funding program for small property owners so that their mortgages can be accounted for in case they have tenants that can't pay the rent. And I'm fully supportive of Congresswoman Ilhan Omar's bill that she also introduced in Congress that talks about the cancellation of rent and mortgages.
So this has
taking that fund for small property owners into account. So I just wanted to plug that in for the viewers so that you can know what the New York State legislature is doing right now in the middle of the night. And, you know, make sure that you research the Housing Justice for All Coalition so that you can amplify their efforts. And if you're a small property owner and a renter, align yourself to the cause so that you can, you know, organize with us and raise awareness about what you're going through so that we collectively, we can organize and learn the tools that we need to get out of this situation.
Because you're one of these rare politicians that listen. You are about listening to what people are talking about. It's not about you being the so-called expert here. You want information from constituents. And correct? Is that how you?
Yeah. So like one thing that I'm really proud of is that our campaign leads by listening. Exactly what you said. And that was an issue with the stimulus package because right now, even the stimulus package, there were so many versions because I feel that the federal government and the people that were negotiating the stimulus package weren't listening to the people on the ground. And then, you know, a lot of the benefits were given to corporations, were given to big business and, you know, small, like women of color owned businesses, for instance, here in the community, you know, they have not been able to tap into, you know, the SBA programs that, you know, Steve Null was talking about. And it seems like there's like a racist, like structural issue where they kind of like look at women of color and, you know, like Black and brown communities as, you know, not bankable. And in terms of the way that they underwrite their loans, it's like, well, you know, we can't underwrite it at this rate because you won't be able to pay it because of what you look like or where you come from. So that's what's happening right now. There's a lot of like, you know, there's a lot of like institutionalized like racism as it relates to these small business loans and the way that it's being implemented. So we need to always look to the community and the experts, the people in the community that own businesses, the people that are suffering, that are closest to the pain, right, of what they're going through, and come up with packages and legislation and laws that, you know, highlight what they're going through and translate that suffering into political action that will make a real impact in people's lives. Because when you focus on the most marginalized and oppressed in society and you come up with laws that address that reality, a lot of people in society benefits. So it's a win-win situation for everybody. So I just wanted to, you know, point that out. But definitely get connected to us at lopezforthepeople.com so that you can listen with us and continue to learn from the community and all the wonderful conversations that we're having.
And we want to thank you so very, very much. And thank Steve for allowing us to listen to your incredible knowledge. I mean, you've been doing this for 30 years, right?
Yeah, don't remind me. Listen, before you go, I just want to repeat two things. Number one, to all the Bronx voters.
Yes.
The 3 people that are not the friends who have used their office not to empower the workers, but to empower landlords are Michael Blake, Melissa Mark Vrettos, and Richie Torres.
Okay.
Don't vote for those 3. The other people, you know, you've got a good one there. And the second thing is that I'm going to project that if we don't pass this bill, that within the next 5 years, the number one reason for businesses to lay off workers and or to close will be the property tax, paying their landlords property tax. It'll surpass the rent as the reason for businesses to close and lay off workers. So that's why we have to deal with this now.
Thank you so much. This has been so enlightening. And final word, congratulations on your endorsement from Naomi Klein.
Oh my God, I'm so grateful for that. Yeah.
That's wonderful, wonderful. We
Uh-huh.
are going to, it's been really enlightening. And I know our audience has really enjoyed both of you very, very much. And we're going to have you on in June. We'll get Saya back on board, and we'll have you guys talk about this much more. All right? So thank you so very much. We've run out of time. Steve, Samelys, thank you so very much.
Okay, take care.
All the best. See you next week on The Radical Imagination.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
A powerful new movement is rising across America. From the Mississippi Delta to the Apache stronghold, from the homeless encampments of Washington to the coal fields of West Virginia. We are the 140 million poor and low-wealth people in this country, and we are building the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival.
On June 20th, between the primaries and the general election, we will rise together for the mass Poor People's Assembly and Moral March on Washington, a digital justice gathering.
Our nation is at a historic crossroads. There are those who say big change isn't necessary or possible, that we are powerless to make our lives better.
But history teaches us that it is exactly in times like these that people from all walks of life must build a broad and deep movement from the bottom up.
On June 20th, we will come together to lift the voices and faces of poverty in the midst of pandemic for a massive, historic online gathering that will embolden us, strengthen us, and prepare us to fight for the kind of society we know we so badly need and deserve.
Rise with us. Visit June2020.org.